Well, hello, Village family. I am super excited about today, and I'm excited about introducing you to a friend. I want to tell you how I first met him. I was watching my computer late one night, and I saw Carlton Pearson, Bishop Carlton Pearson, one of my most influential guys in my life, and he was interviewing this preacher, and I was just mesmerized for an hour. I just was eating it up, calling my wife, saying, "Come here, you got to see this." At the end of the interview, he said, Kristian Smith pastors in Atlanta. And it's like, what? He pastors in Atlanta? I couldn't believe it. And so I said, I'm gonna meet him. I've got to take him to lunch, and I just hope we can become friends. So I was able to do that, was able to take him to lunch, and I had just been looking forward to having him at our church. Now, I wanted him to be there in person, but because I'm in Southern California, I called Kristian. I said, is there any way that you would let us do an interview so I could introduce you to our congregation, and then as soon as you will have a moment, would you come back and be with us live? But before I actually start interviewing him, let me just tell you the formal stuff that I want to tell you. He was born February 23rd, 1984. His parents, W. James and Tony Smith, in Oakland, California, spent much of his adolescence in San Diego. We'll talk about that. Received his Bachelor of Arts degree in Telecommunications 2006, as well as his Master's in Business Administration 2009, both from Alabama A&M University, where he was a football star, captain of the team, big deal. That meant a whole bunch to me, as you know. Kristian, nobody in our church, very few in our church, but some. So anyway, that's good. Kristian has served in many areas of ministry. He holds a Master's of Divinity degree from McAfee School of Theology. I was blown away listening to him talk to Bishop Pearson because he just had insight, and he just was able to look at text a little differently, and I realized that he was brilliant, and I wanted us to be friends. He's the author of Breaking All the Rules. Many of you will resonate with that title, An Ancient Framework for Modern Faith. He has a podcast, Holy Smokes Movement podcast, where he is a cigar aficionado, so he will smoke cigars, and I love that. He's a foodie, which I love. There's so many things. I just love this guy. And I am so excited about you meeting him in person. But before that, I'm so honored that you are here. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. I've been so excited, and I'm excited about our people getting to meet you.
It's been a pleasure to gather with you on the occasions that we've been able to do so.
Oh, I'm hoping it'll just continue more and more and more. Now, one of the things on the program that I was watching Bishop Pearson, most of you know he passed away a few months ago. But when he was talking, he was talking about SM Lockridge, and many of you won't even have any clue what that means. But SM Lockridge was considered one of the greatest pulpiteers, orators, black preachers, and one of my heroes, and he had pastored in San Diego. And so I'm listening to Pearson talking, and it hit me. He was saying that your father followed Pastor Lockridge at Calvary Church, and so that's the church that you grew up in. I guess cut your teeth.
From the age of 10 till I left San Diego for college at 18, I was the member of Calvary Baptist Church, where my dad, W. James Smith, was a pastor. He was the person that followed SM Lockridge.
And he's great. I went online and found video of him. He was fantastic.
That's my hero.
Yeah.
My dad is my dude. He shaped a lot of how I move in the world. He shaped a lot of how I think. Like, when people who know my dad, like, actually knew him well, when they see what I do in ministry, they say, that makes sense. Because, like, my dad got put out of the convention back in the 80s because he was ordaining women to preach.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, they put him out of the convention. And then they asked him to come back because they missed him. Which, yeah, he was, pushing the envelope in those ways. And he definitely still had his blind spots. He wasn't affirming in the way that I am. But I do believe if he was still here, we'd be having some great conversations, and he probably would have been coming around on a lot of stuff that he never thought about during his life.
I was wondering what got you, growing up with faith, meaning what it meant to you, then how did you become this progressive thought leader? And you say it's just you, that was birthed in you through your dad. You saw some of that.
Yeah, he taught me to think critically, my mom and my dad. My dad kind of conditioned me like you would an attorney. Like, he would tell me I need to state my case when I wanted to do certain stuff. So that was just something that was kind of ingrained in me, that I need to have logical steps to what I'm doing and why, and how to explain to people what I'm doing and why. The obstruction to that, though, was he didn't teach me how to do that in my theology.
Right.
So I had the critical thinking skill set, but was never given permission to use it in my theology until I got to seminary at McAfee School of Theology at Mercer. And then my professors there said, you know, those critical thinking skills that you have, we want you to use them here.
Ooh, that's good.
And I was like, okay.
That's so good.
And then, you know, we just started to go down that path of unlearning and relearning and developing my own sense of spirituality instead of the sense that of spirituality that was ingrained in me. Like, what are the things that were ingrained in me that I want to keep? And what are the things that were ingrained in me that I want to discard because they're not serving me or anybody else well? So I believe I'm walking in the same path as my father, just the latest iteration of it. Yeah.
Now, for me, there was a sense of what I had believed. There was that death of what's real, what's not real. You present it in such a way it doesn't feel like there was as much of that death, but was there that feeling for you, the deconstruction we call it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is different for everybody. Mine wasn't as drastic because I had a good experience in church growing up.
Me too.
You know, I wasn't raised in church feeling like I was out of place, feeling like the church was against me, although many of my siblings had that experience. I am the epitome of privilege in the Black Baptist Church. I'm cisgender, heterosexual, Black male that can sing and preach. So, you know, like, and things were pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
When I learned how my embedded theology was causing harm to other people, I said, oh no, I can't continue doing that. I didn't realize this was the impact that my embedded theology was having on people. So I want to do something different that doesn't cause harm to people. And we'll just figure out what that looks like. And then along the way, as I continue to unpack and unearth so many things that were embedded in me, then I began to discover, oh, some of this stuff actually was harming me. I just didn't realize it.
Right.
I was so accustomed to the dysfunction that I didn't know anything else. So it's been a life-giving process, even though some death had to happen. Absolutely.
Now, did you start the faith community here in Atlanta, or was it going and you became a part of it? How did that?
So I started it. There's a backstory for the faith community, and it starts again at McAfee. I had a class with Frank Granger. He was a staff pastor in Athens. I can't remember the name of his church. He's an adjunct professor. The class was called Ministry with Adults. And part of our big assignment for that class was to teach an adult Bible study for 5 to 8 sessions. So the only way I could accomplish that was to call some people and ask them to come to our apartment for a few weeks. So I called some friends and family, said, I got this assignment I need to do for seminary. Can you indulge me for 6 weeks and just come be a part of this Bible study with me? And then we'll be done. And they said, yeah, sure. So we had about 8 or 9 people that came to our apartment. My wife and I, we would host them at our apartment, have little snacks and stuff. And we did a study through the book of James. And I was testing out my facilitation model. I was testing out my theological lens in an actual gathering of people who weren't in seminary.
Right.
So like, let's see how this goes. And after the first session, my wife looked at me when everybody left and said, you know, you're not going to be able to stop this when this assignment is over, right? And I said, girl, you tripping. Like, I'm not doing this after this assignment. Like, I'm getting this grade and I'm out of here. And she said, okay, we'll see. And fast forward 6 weeks later, we get to the end of the 6th session. And I tell everybody, hey, thank y'all so much for helping me with this. I got everything I need for my assignment. And mid-sentence, they said, whoa, no. This is not ending right here. Like, we'll be back next week. What are we studying next?
Right.
And that was the beginning of the faith community.
Oh, my goodness. That is a great... Now, if I remember the Pearson interview, was there a professor? That wasn't the professor that became a part of your faith community later, was it? Didn't somebody come and become a part of your church?
So when we actually moved to make the faith community a public ministry, that's when my professor came in. So for 3 years, we were just a small group that met in my apartment. No desire to start anything different. My goal was to build my clothing business and take care of my family. That way, I would have this small group that meets. That was like my little church.
So you're an entrepreneur who has a love for God, is figuring it all out, doing your study in your house, but you're not thinking about being a big pastor or anything like that.
No. I tried to avoid it at all costs. One of my classmates, Adam Gray, chastised me one day. He called me to go get coffee, and he just chastised me. He said, "Kristian, what the hell are you doing?" I said, "Adam, why are you talking to me in this tone of voice? I don't understand." And he said, "You have a church in your apartment right now. Why aren't you doing anything with that?" I said, "Adam, I'm not trying to start a church, man. I'm cool. Like, we doing our little study. I don't want that smoke. I don't want that heat."
Right.
He was like, he said, "I know you, Kristian. You don't want to move that group out of your apartment because if you make it bigger, you have to ask other people for help. And you're accustomed to doing stuff on your own."
Right.
And that stung a little bit. And he said, "Listen, you don't have to take my word for it. Ask the people in the group what they think about it. If they don't want to do a church, then don't do it." I said, "Okay, I can do that." So I went to everybody individually and I asked everybody what they thought. And their response was, "We've been waiting on you."
Wow.
So that's when we started to put together the plans for a public ministry, at which point my Hebrew Bible professor, Dave Garber, and his wife, who was a scholar in her own right, Michelle Garber, they became a part of our core team to help us imagine what this ministry could look like. And they've been like faithful members of the ministry since we started, which is like one of the most proud tidbits. Like, I'm just so proud of that the person who taught me how to read the Old Testament calls me pastor is so wild.
That's mind blowing. That is. Now, the inclusion, the LGBT inclusion, because that was so impressive, because I didn't see a lot of African-American church leaders who seem to be out there. Well, not a lot of white church leaders that are out there, at least from our evangelical background.
I got more than we got.
But it's like y'all didn't have many. How did that develop for you? Where did it come from? I guess your dad. I guess part of it's that logic.
And my church was, I would say, don't ask, don't tell.
Right.
Like, we're not going to preach.
We were that.
People are going to hell.
We were that.
We're not going to do sermons about them to condemn them, but we also don't affirm them. We want them to get delivered, right? Because that's wrong. That's kind of the space I was raised in. I got to seminary, and I went to McAfee intentionally because, I was like, I know how to do black church. I know black church theology. I want to experience something different. I want to get around people who think differently than me. And we would have conversations in class. And I know there was one conversation in particular where somebody said something about the LGBTQ plus community. And for me, it was just like, yeah, well, that's wrong. Like, I don't like want to harm these people, but I think that's wrong. And my classmates were like, "Kristian, like, tell me more about this," because I'm a nice guy. So they just assumed I was affirming. Right. And when they found out I wasn't, they challenged me on it. And I said, let me sit with this. Let me think about this. And where it really shifted for me was when I looked inward, because I was taught that sexuality was a choice. And my dad even said, and he didn't say this like, in the pulpit, but he would say it like privately. He was like, "Yeah, you can be born that way." He's like, "But you're supposed to be born again." And people are still saying that today.
Right, they are.
But when I sat with it, I thought about my own sexuality. I said, "Okay, Kristian, did you choose to be straight?"
That's profound.
Did you wake up one day and go out to the playground at the elementary school and you saw the boys and the girls and you thought to yourself, I like both. Which one am I going to choose? I didn't choose.
No.
I just like what I like. I discovered my sexuality. I didn't choose it. And once I came to terms with my own sexuality, I knew I could no longer subscribe to a theology that condemned people for their sexuality.
So good.
And that's just where it started. And at that point, I could not continue in living out that kind of theology.
Well, you're talking about it in a way that is deeper and richer than anybody out there. You don't back down from. Sometimes I watch and I think, well, he's not going there. Nope, he went there. You don't back down from anything, and it's brilliant. And the way you're doing it, and it's just, I know that people are going to start listening to you because you are way ahead.
I appreciate it. Doc Hollingsworth, pastor at Second Ponce in Atlanta. Yeah. He said to me one time, we were having a conversation, real good guy. I like Doc a lot. And he was talking about how, I've started this church as a grassroots thing. So it's just me. And he said, the one thing I love about what you do is that because you're not beholden to all of these other organizations, that gives you so much prophetic liberty.
Yeah.
You can say your convictions without worrying about what's going to happen because you're talking to the people that you're talking to. And the people you're not talking to don't have any impact on whether your ministry lives or not. So go. Mm-hmm. So I just go.
I love that. We're an integrated church. We want to be our best, and we just envision what it could be if it was just this beautiful mix of people. But I hear you talking sometimes about Black church and Black spirituality, and I want to learn. Mm-hmm. I want to. Can you just talk some about how you kind of see church and integration and those kind of things?
Yeah, so this is a topic I'm really passionate about. My next book I plan to write is going to be about culture. Because when I talk about Black church and Black spirituality, I'm just talking about Black culture. Mm-hmm. We have a culture that our ancestors transported from Africa to here in the transatlantic slave trade. We had a history before we ever got here. We had spirituality before we ever got here. When you look into Igbo and Yoruba and all of these different African spiritualities, that is our heritage. That's our core. But then we go through this transatlantic slave trade, this perverted, distorted version of Christianity is imposed onto us. And then many of us, because of our genius, figured out ways to slip our African spirituality into that. Particularly when you look at people of African heritage who landed in Catholic communities, because the Catholics have so many patron saints. African spiritualists were able to shield their deities under the names of these Catholic saints. Right. So we've found ways to hold on to that. So when you look at the Black church experience, it is drastically different from any other Western church experience because of the African influence. So I'm just one of those people that's different, because a lot of people in my community feel like we either got to hold on to the Black church or we got to go back to African spirituality. But I believe both of those are us, right? The African spirituality that we had before enslavement is a part of our heritage. The Black church that we created post-enslavement is a part of our heritage. And I want to keep the best of both of those in how we move forward. So the Black church experience is really about culture. And when you walk into a Black church, you experience a different culture. So my ministry, it has white people in it, but culturally, it's a Black cultural experience. Mm-hmm. And the white people know that, right? Because...
And I guess they're hungry for it. They're desiring to experience that. They want to experience what that's like.
I don't know if they're hungry and desire that experience. I think they just appreciate that they can be themselves while we can be ourselves. Because a lot of times, and I'm not talking about Village. I don't know anything about how Village operates. So this is not about you. But a lot of times in white-led spaces, Black people are expected to assimilate to the culture of the space. And if we don't assimilate, we don't fit in.
Right. And that has been what we have seen. We don't want it to be like that, but that has been kind of the way it is. And so you're nailing it. That's exactly true.
Yeah, and I tried when we first started the ministry to, have a space that brought in all of these different cultures. And I promoted it. I actually started with a pastoral team. It wasn't just me. I had two partners. One of them was a white male.
Right.
That didn't work out. And part of the reason it didn't work out is because they didn't understand the magnitude of that task, bringing people together culturally in a worship experience, because our worship experiences are so drastically different. Mm-hmm. I said, that's going to be the most difficult part, because I come from a background where we shout and we dance. You come from a background that is solemn and silent. How are we going to bring those two things together? That didn't work out. And it wasn't even because of the whole worship piece. It was just, other things that caused it to not work out. But I realized as we were building this ministry that Black people needed a space. Mm-hmm. Like Black people just needed a space to be Black and not have to worry about code switching, not have to worry about who's going to hear what we saying. Are they going to understand it? It's like, when you come here, you be yourself.
Right.
You be your, can I cuss?
I think you can, yeah.
You come here and be your Black ass self.
Right.
And anybody who is uncomfortable with Black people being Black doesn't have to be here.
Yeah, they won't be there.
And if you're comfortable with Black people being Black, we comfortable with you being you. And that's just kind of how we've created this.
I wonder if it ever could be. If could you ever envision in the future a space that was? Are there any churches that you've ever seen that were able to do it? I think about Paul back in the day.
I have never seen a successful Black-led multicultural church, because in my experience, white people don't like to submit to Black leadership. Black people will submit to white leadership. That's all we've ever known, right? In this country, we've been under the authority of white people in many different ways. So it's not difficult for us to go into a space led by white people and get with the program. White people struggle with that.
Who wrote Jesus for the Disenfranchised?
Was that
we know who it is, but he had the big church in San Francisco back in the I wonder what that church was like, because I've always thought how cool it was that he was brilliant and that it was interracial and it was Black-led.
It wasn't Howard Thurman.
Yes, Howard.
It was Howard Thurman?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, Howard Thurman. Right. Black History Month. And we are, again, we're wanting to be so much better than how we grew up. There's so many things that I didn't even know until the last 10, 15 years. I think about the Tulsa massacre. That was something that college, graduate school, how do you never, ever know about that? Has anything surprised you where you, as an adult, you say, sheesh, I didn't know that? Or were you pretty well equipped to know all the things that had gone on?
It's impossible to know all the things, but I knew enough to not be surprised when I learned something.
That's true. I'm not surprised, but it's like I had no idea that had happened.
Yeah, it's like I was raised to understand many components of my history. My education growing up didn't go back into like African spirituality, but the history of my people here, that was really reinforced for me when I was a kid. So yeah, I knew about the Tulsa massacre. I didn't know about a lot of the other massacres that happened, but I know the
You're not surprised.
Yeah, I know the meta narrative of transatlantic slave trade, chattel slavery.
Gotcha.
Reconstruction, Jubilee, Black codes, all of these, Jim Crow, lynching, prison industrial complex. I know those overarching things, but there's always little stories in there that you never heard.
Right.
And this reminds me of a book that I read called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And just a profound piece of literature. I forget the author's name, but the premise of the book is that in our educational system, history is the only topic that the more you learn, the dumber you get, because it's taught as propaganda.
Right.
So
the winners have to hold the narrative. They're the ones that get to tell the story.
Yeah. You have to do so much extra work to learn the true history, because what you're taught in our educational system is sheer propaganda most times.
Right.
So for people who are trying to become anti-racist, I think the first place to start is start educating yourself. Start reading books by Black people who talk about race.
That's right.
Right. And sit with that. Do it in community with other people. Read it together. Ask questions. Because, that's a great place to start. It's just by educating yourself on what's going on. Because when you start educating yourself, you can't unknow what you learn. Like, It's there. You got to do something with it. So I encourage people to start with education.
So that makes perfect sense.
The churches that diversify leadership do the best job. And like leadership as far as like decision makers, people who help to shape the direction of the ministry. A lot of times what I've seen is like you get white churches with Black people. Well, Black people don't shape anything there. They just have to shape shift. So that's where I see the most work being done. I was sharing with some of my colleagues in this deconstruction space, because now the deconstruction community is a community of its own. Like, we have colleagues who do this work, and I've been talking to some of my white colleagues about how what happens in this country, because white voices are amplified primarily, that becomes the default. So in the deconstruction space, when you hear the term deconstruction, it's usually referring to white people deconstructing.
It is.
And then I came around and realized there isn't a space for Black people to talk about our nuanced cultural experiences in deconstruction. So I started, referring to mine as Black deconstruction. Like, if you want to deconstruct your experiences as a Black person with an emphasis on your culture, that's what I do. And some people will say, why does it have to be Black deconstruction? And I tell them, because when y'all started about deconstruction, you just didn't say white, but that's what you meant, because you wasn't talking about Black people's experiences. And that's what I see as the problem with most institutions in this country. White people do stuff, and then once they get it all built up the way they want to build it, hey, Blacks, come be a part of what we built. Well, nah, you got to include us on the front end. If you want us to really feel like we're a part of it, you have to include us in the decision-making process. You got to allow us to help shape culture. You have to listen to us.
That's it.
Yeah. So I think that's where people can have the most impact. It's like, just listen to Black people.
And I hope as people are watching, as you're maybe listening in the village service, I hope you are hearing this. It is so necessary, and it's a learning process, because we have had the microphone. We've had the microphone. And to be able to say, will you take the microphone and will you talk and let us just listen and learn? We've talked about it with female theologians and LGBT theologians and African-American culture curators who are able to say, this is the dots that y'all have never understood. And it's important for us to do that. And we need classes on how to do it, because we don't have any experience with it.
And it's not just a white problem. Let me say that. It is a white problem, but it's not just a white problem, because I have to do it in my space. Like I said, within the Black church, I am the epitome of privilege. So it would be really easy for me to create a space where my voice is the only authoritative voice. It'd be really, really easy for me to do that. And most people wouldn't have any issue with it, because that's what most people know. But we in our ministry had to be very intentional about how do we create space for women to lead. Like, just give them the freedom to just lead and say what they need to say and create culture. How do we make sure we have space where LGBTQ plus people can lead,
right,
where their voices are authoritative on topics and not just, we're going to let you say something. Like, that requires work. It requires courage. It requires intentionality. But so it's a problem that we're all navigating in some way or another. In the white space, it just looks a little bit different in my space, but it's the same issue.
You have done more work than anyone that I know on digital space and the idea of community, online kind of community. I know a little bit about what the evangelical churches, what their membership numbers have done over the years. I don't know as much about the African American church, but you have been you're ahead of us on a lot of this thinking. Can you talk just a little bit about church as we knew it, where it's going, and kind of how you're envisioning it? Just a small
yeah. No, just a small question, right? I believe we're going through a reformation. So about every 500 years in Christendom, there is a major reformation. The last one was Martin Luther in the 16th century.
Mm-hmm.
So we're 500 years away from that now. We're experiencing two significant reformations, in my opinion. One is a theological reformation, and then two is like more of a ministry model reformation. Trump expedited the theological reformation because I work with a lot of Black church kids who went through this path of, okay, the Black church is problematic theologically, so they went to white churches that seemed safer, but then they got to the white churches, and many times it's like Black Q plus people. They were too queer for the Black church, and then they got in the white church where they were accepted for being queer, and then Trump came into power, and then they realized they were too Black for their white church.
Mm-hmm.
So it started this process of, what do I do now? So that's a major theological reformation that we're seeing happening across the board, which is why the evangelical church is so hell-bent on demonizing deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
They want to create their own narrative about what deconstruction is, as if it is like anti-gospel, anti-church, when it's really just people trying to figure out what they believe and why.
Right.
So we have this theological reformation that's happening, but then we also have this ministry model reformation that's happening, which was expedited by the pandemic, because a whole lot of people during the pandemic, it was the first time in their lives they couldn't go to church,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then a lot of people realize, I don't miss it.
Right.
And my church told me during the pandemic that God would meet me on the stream. If we got together on the stream or on the Zoom meeting, God would be there with us then. So you're hard pressed to convince me now that God will no longer meet me on the stream because we have the option to come into the building.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing a significant shift in how people do church. Even if they don't evolve theologically, they're evolving in how they do church. I'm in the middle of both of them. I'm in the middle of the theological reformation and the ministry model reformation. And we're just like navigating how that plays out, which is very interesting, because like doing one is enough, but doing both of them at the same time is a beast.
It is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's stage of life. I love when I listen to you and I hear the energy and the way you're thinking about it. It is very encouraging to me, who's like a generation older, and I'm thinking, wow, he's on the cutting edge of this. He's figuring this thing out, and he's going to be helping us as we move into the future. It's very exciting to me.
I appreciate it. I love what I do. I'm very passionate about it.
So much of what you do is online. Do you do things like, we want to have you at the Village just to preach? We would love that. Do you have opportunities where we can come to one of your services? We could.
Oh yeah, we're in the process now of working back up to our in-person gatherings. You know, the faith community is not an Atlanta church. It is a digital church. So I would say maybe 20% of members of our community actually live in Atlanta. The other 80% are scattered all throughout the country and other countries as well. We are right now working on some things internally about how do we responsibly do worship. And I mean like fiscal integrity, financial responsibility, which is a part of that ministry model shift. Because we're a digital ministry, a lot of times in the digital space, people feel no obligation to support the ministries that they glean from, because everything is a click away.
Mm-hmm.
So I jump on this stream. If I like it, I stay. When I don't like it anymore, I go to the next stream. People can visit 10 churches in 10 minutes if they want to, because of the way the ministry model is changing. Well, with that in mind, everybody has to figure out how to adjust. So ministries are trying to figure out, how do we adjust to this? And we're going through that internally as well, where we're figuring out, what does it look like for us to host these consistent gatherings, and who is going to be a part of the movement to go in that direction. And that's what we're fleshing out. So right now, we're on pace right now to gather 2 to 3 times in person this year.
But your congregation, which you said is digital, and it's not just Atlanta, it's all over the world, I would guess, you guys are growing. I can just tell that there's energy there that's impressive.
It's fun to watch. We're definitely growing. We went through a major transition last year because I didn't have a blueprint for how
you're making it up. You're figuring it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we jumped out of the plane and started knitting the parachute on the way down. Right. So the first 5 years of this ministry was just grueling. It was tough. Hair started falling out, super stressed out, stress eating, gaining weight, just grueling to figure out, how do we do this in a sustainable way? Because for the first couple of years, we were trying to find our identity, and we found our identity. Then it was like, okay, now we got to find our people. So when I got on TikTok, that's when we found our people.
By the way, you guys all need to follow him on TikTok, follow him on Instagram. It is brilliant. I watch and I think, he's on it. So we'll make sure we have on the screen all the information. Please follow.
I appreciate it. So yeah, we had to find our identity. Then we had to find our people. And then when we found our people, it was like, yes, now we're moving in the right direction. We found our people. We found the people who need what we're offering. And they came in the droves. Like we started a digital community that initially, it was like 20, 30 people in the digital community. And by this time last year, it was up to 3,500. The problem we ran into was that the people we were serving did not feel any obligation or compulsion or anything to reciprocate that.
Right.
So then we had to figure out, all right, we established our identity, we found our people. Now, how are we going to make this sustainable? Because we can't continue to do this as a passion project that is self-funded. That's not feasible. I'm going to die young if I do that. Mm-hmm. So last year we went through that transition, and now I think we found our rhythm, and we figured out how to do this long-term in a sustainable way where everybody is taken care of from the pew to the pulpit.
That's awesome. That's so good.
I appreciate it.
If you had one word, people are watching this sitting in a Sunday morning service. So they're sitting there, had their week, they're sitting here, they've just listened to this intellectual discussion about all kind of things. Anything that just from your heart as a pastor to them sitting out there, you could just share as a way for us to close?
The basis of my ministry and the reason why I do what I do, the reason why the faith community became a thing is heavily, heavily rooted in the greatest commandment. Greatest commandment theology is a strand of theology that I curated in my studies because I was trying to figure out, is there a way for me to continue in this path of ministry that is just and sensible, that I find in this sacred text? And when I landed on the greatest commandment, that was it. Jesus said, and I'm saying this to people for a reason. Jesus said, greatest commandment is love God. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And whenever I say that, people generally conclude, yeah, love God and love your neighbor, and always leave out the self part. Just always leave out the self. And some people will diminish that and say, well, yeah, you got to love God first. And then after you love God, you love your neighbor as yourself. But when we look at that particular text where it says love God and the second part is like it, that word like in the Greek means of equal rank. So love for neighbor as self is of equal rank with love for God. So you can't love God if you don't love neighbor as self. And Jesus reinforces that in the next verse. He says, everything in the law, And everything in the prophets hinge on these two together, that you love God and how you love your neighbor as a reflection of the love you have for yourself. And what I've come to discover is we've done a pretty good job with talking about the greatest commandment, because, you know, Jesus commanded us to love God and love our neighbor. But it's really interesting. He didn't command us to love ourselves. He just assumed it. He uses love for self as the basis for how you love your neighbor. So I call love for self as the greatest assumption in the gospel. And unfortunately, we've assumed that people know what that means, and they don't. So I want to encourage everybody that's listening and watching, start learning how to love yourself. The more you love yourself, the more you can love other people. The more you love yourself, the more you can love God. The more you can love yourself, the more peace you experience, the more joy you experience, the more happiness you experience. So I just want to encourage everybody, love yourself, love yourself, love yourself, because that's what God wants for all of us.
That's a great word. I appreciate so much. Would you do me one more favor? Would you say a closing prayer for this time together? I'd appreciate that. And then promise me that you'll come and preach in person at the Village. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, I would love to. And I know some of the Atlanta people in our community would love to come to that too.
That's awesome.
That is like, awesome. We want you to preach. I will. Just give me some time.
I can't wait. I can wait. Thank you, Kristian. If you'll say a prayer.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to invite everybody to get in whatever position connects you to the divine. I know that for some people, it's bow your heads and close your eyes, and that works. And for some people, that can be distracting. Yeah. So whatever helps you to get.
If you're driving, don't do that.
You don't do that if you're driving. You know, if you like to gaze when you pray, gaze. Whatever helps you to connect. God, our creator, God, our friend, our mother, our father, our brother, our sister, our sibling, non-binary God, trans God, all that you are. We acknowledge all that you are, because all that you are is really beyond our comprehension. We don't have the language to even begin to indicate all that you are. So we just acknowledge all that you are, and we acknowledge that we are a reflection of you, that we are created in your image. So thank you for that reminder that when we walk around, we carry your image, that when people see us, they see you. Help us to keep that in mind as we move throughout the world and how we treat people. Help us to keep that in mind in how we treat ourselves, that how we treat ourselves is how we treat you. So when we beat ourselves up, we're beating you up. When we talk down to ourselves, we're talking down to you. Help us to speak life into ourselves. Help us to speak life into those around us. Be with us as we leave this place, but God, please never dismiss us from your presence. It's in all of your names that we pray. And we say amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. It was great.
It was. I enjoyed it.
Thank y'all for joining too.